Russia is burning, not metaphorically, literally, but what you are witnessing is not a temporary tactical setback. It is the systematic collapse of the single largest territorial gain Russia managed to hold in this entire cycle. Pull the lens back for a moment. In April 2026, for the first time since August 2024, Russian forces suffered a net loss of territory. They did not merely stop advancing. They began losing ground, 116 square kilometers in a single month. But here is what the headlines are missing. That reversal was not random. It was engineered. It was provoked. And most critically, it proves something Putin has been unable to admit. Russian assumptions about how this war ends have shattered. What happened in the final weeks of April and the opening of May changes not just the battlefield, but the entire logic of Russian strategy. Let me walk you through what actually happened at the operational level, why Russia's position now looks nothing like Moscow promised it would, and what this means for the forecast of this war. For 15 months since August 2024, Russia had accumulated territory at a pace they had not achieved since 2022. Month after month, the narrative from Moscow was consistent. Ukraine is collapsing, the West is tired, and Russian superiority is becoming irreversible. Kremlin officials circulated maps showing Russian forces advancing on multiple axes, capturing towns, grinding through defensive lines, and pushing westward. Putin himself spoke of a historic opportunity to reshape the map. The Russian military command issued target timelines. Moscow's political narrative hardened around the assumption that territory lost by Russia stays lost, and territory gained by Russia is permanent. That assumption died in western Zaporizhia Oblast. Beginning in late April 2026, Ukrainian forces launched a coordinated series of counteroffensive operations across multiple points in western Zaporizhia, an area Russia had spent months claiming as essentially conquered. This was not a desperate local riposte. This was a systematic dismantling of Russian rear area logistics and command structure. The Ukrainian command identified a critical vulnerability. Russia had advanced so quickly and with so little operational depth that their forward positions were connected to rear areas by thin supply lines, and those lines were defended by insufficient force depth. Ukrainian intelligence operated with precision. Strike drones identified Russian command posts, ammunition depots, and fuel concentrations. Mid-range missiles targeted consolidation points, and then Ukrainian ground forces moved. In coordinated succession, Ukrainian forces liberated Mala-Tokmachka, Bilohirya, Primorsky, and a series of other settlements across the region. This is not chaos or improvisation. This is doctrine. Identify the weak point in the logistical chain, cut it, force the enemy to choose between defending territory or maintaining supply, then exploit the choice they make. And it gets even more serious from here, because what happened in Zaporizhia was not isolated. Simultaneously, Ukrainian forces were clearing Russian infiltration positions in Kupiansk to the north. Ukrainian company commanders reported eliminating the final Russian sabotage teams operating within the city boundaries. Russian forces, instead of consolidating an offensive, found themselves forced into reactive posture across three separate sectors. Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, southern Donetsk, they all saw Ukrainian initiative, not Russian. The operational tempo, the sequencing, the targeting, all of it flipped. Ukraine was no longer defending against Russian momentum. Ukraine was generating momentum. The numbers make this undeniable. In May 2026 alone, according to verified Ukrainian casualty tracking data, Ukrainian drone and strike operations inflicted approximately 19,203 Russian personnel casualties in just the first 19 days of May. That is not 19,000 isolated deaths. That is the equivalent of an entire motorized rifle division being destroyed in 3 weeks. Major Robert Magyar, commander of Ukrainian unmanned systems forces, reported that Ukrainian drones would likely exceed 34,000 Russian casualties by month's end. Put that in context, Ukrainian Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov has now established a standing target of 50,000 Russian casualties per month. Russia's military recruitment, by contrast, produced only 70,500 new contracts in the entire first quarter of 2026, meaning Russia is now recruiting at a rate below its replacement losses. This is the hidden variable that Putin's operational planners failed to calculate. It is not just about territory. It is not even primarily about territory. It is about the asymmetry between how fast Russia can assemble new forces and how fast Ukraine can dismantle them. Russia is trading space for time, but that time is being consumed faster than new forces arrive. The result is a slow collapse of the logistics framework that sustained Russian advance in the first place. Let me walk you through what actually failed in Russian doctrine. Russian commanders assumed that if they captured territory quickly enough, held it long enough to integrate it into supply networks and establish defensive positions, that territory would become politically and militarily permanent. That assumption worked when Russian advances were shallow, isolated, and not yet connected to coherent logistics. But the moment those advances connected into larger operational corridors, they became targets. And the moment they became targets, they became liabilities. Ukrainian forces understood this before the Russian command did. They allowed Russia to advance far enough to create a long logistics tail, then targeted the tail, not the head. When your enemy's supply line stretches across 100 kilometers and is defended by insufficient troops at too many points, you do not attack the front. You cut the rear. You force the front to collapse from behind. That principle played out across Zaporizhia. Russian forces advanced from Robotyne toward Orikhiv and Zaporizhia city, establishing a pushing line that looked on Moscow's maps like inevitable progress. But as they advanced, they left behind larger and larger territory to defend with the same total force count. The mathematics became impossible, and when Ukrainian strikes degraded Russian reserves and ammunition, the front became a bleeding edge instead of an advancing front. The strategic consequence is enormous. Russia has now suffered its first net territorial loss since August 2024. That is not a symbolic moment. That is the moment the Russian campaign's momentum inverted. For 15 months, the narrative was unidirectional. Russia advances, Ukraine withdraws, the map shifts eastward. Now that narrative has broken. Ukraine is not just defending. Ukraine is reclaiming territory. And the reclamation is happening because Russia's logistical model is failing under sustained precision strikes. What happens next changes everything. Because Ukraine has now demonstrated that Russian territorial gains are reversible, the entire strategic calculus shifts. Putin entered this phase of the war expecting a grinding war of attrition that would break Ukrainian will. He anticipated that as he captured territory, Ukrainian morale would collapse, Western support would fatigue, and the political cost of holding territory would favor Moscow. That assumption depended on Russia holding the initiative and Ukrainian forces remaining primarily defensive. The moment Ukraine seized initiative, that assumption collapsed, and the killing capacity of Ukrainian precision strikes, drones, mid-range missiles, electronic warfare, means that Russian forces cannot achieve the mass concentration necessary to hold both territory and operational coherence. They are forced to choose. They are now choosing to lose territory rather than lose the force structure itself. The broader lesson here extends beyond this month or this sector. It proves that Russian military doctrine has not adapted to the reality of modern warfare. Russian commanders are still thinking in terms of 20th century attrition, grind the enemy's army, hold territory, outlast them politically. But 21st century warfare is about precision, standoff distance, and the asymmetry of kill capacity. A Ukrainian drone costs thousands of dollars. A Russian logistics convoy costs far more and can be replaced far more slowly. Ukraine is deliberately choosing that asymmetry. Russia is paying for not understanding it until now. Pull the lens back further. The territorial reversal in Zaporizhia is not a random event. It is confirmation of a larger pattern that has been building for 18 months. Ukraine's capacity to generate and sustain offensive operations is growing, while Russia's capacity to sustain offensive operations is shrinking. This is not because Ukraine has more troops. It is because Ukraine has chosen an operational doctrine that favors its advantages, in precision, adaptability, rapid target acquisition, over the categories where Russia tried to impose dominance, mass, artillery volume, attrition calculus. The real question now is not whether Russia can retake Zaporizhia. The real question is whether Russia can defend what it currently holds while bearing the casualty rate it is currently bearing. And the evidence suggests the answer is no. Ukrainian forces are not only counterattacking in Zaporizhia, they are simultaneously clearing Russian positions in Kupiansk, probing Russian flanks in multiple sectors, and maintaining a strike campaign deep inside Russian territory that has degraded oil refining capacity, ammunition production, and logistics coordination. Russia is not fighting one war. Russia is fighting multiple wars on multiple axes simultaneously, and it is losing force coherence because it is trying to defend everywhere at once. That is the condition of a military that has lost the initiative. That is the condition of a military that is beginning to recognize, though Putin will never say so publicly, that the assumptions it entered this phase on have catastrophically failed. The oil infrastructure strikes add another dimension. While Ukrainian forces were recapturing Zaporizhia territory, the Ukrainian General Staff was simultaneously striking the Lukoil Nizhegorod-Syntez refinery in Kstovo, the Yaroslavl 3 oil pumping station, and chemical plants across southern Russia. Geolocated imagery confirms fires at the refinery. Russian sources report that the Moscow oil refinery halted processing after May 17 strikes. This is not theater. This is the systematic elimination of Russia's ability to convert crude reserves into fuel that can supply operational forces. And here is what makes this convergent. The territorial loss in Zaporizhia, the casualty count of 19,000 in May alone, the degradation of logistics infrastructure, and the recruitment shortfall are not separate problems for Russia. They are a single problem with multiple vectors. Russia cannot sustain the force density on the ground because casualties are exceeding replacements. It cannot sustain that force because logistics are degraded. It cannot defend degraded supply lines because force density is insufficient. It cannot rebuild force density because recruitment lags behind losses. The system is closing. It is collapsing not from one failure, but from cascading failures that reinforce each other. What this means for Putin is blunt. He is running out of time, and the time is running out faster than his military can compensate. Andy Embrace. He entered this cycle with the assumption of a long, grinding war of attrition. He has instead encountered a short, intense war of precision that is dismantling Russian force structure faster than any doctrine he prepared for. The territorial loss in April and May is not a temporary setback. It is proof that the Russian model is breaking. The question is no longer whether Russia will win. The question is how far the reversal will extend. Will Ukraine retake Zaporizhia and push toward other areas? Will the casualty pressure force Russia into a defensive-only posture across the theater? Will the logistics degradation prevent Russia from sustaining any large-scale operations? These are the actual open questions, and here's why you need to stay with this channel. The answers to these questions will define not just the next 6 months, but the end point of this war. Because what we have witnessed in the past month is not a local victory for Ukraine. It is a strategic inflection point. Russia thought it had broken through. It thought the momentum was irreversible. It thought time was on its side. All of those assumptions are now being tested in real time, and all of them are failing. The Kremlin's demand that Ukraine withdraw from all of Donbass as a precondition for negotiation becomes, in the context of Russian territorial loss and casualty rates exceeding replacement, not a negotiating position, but a last resort demand from a military that has lost the ability to impose its will. Putin can demand territory, but he cannot hold it. And the moment the world sees that clearly, the entire negotiating framework shifts. Stay with this channel. The analysis continues. These territorial shifts, this casualty asymmetry, and this reversal of initiative are only the beginning of what comes next. Because history will record that May 2026 was the month Russia stopped advancing, and that, in the context of Putin's war aims, is the month the war effectively ended, even if the fighting continues for years. Thank you for being here. If you're not yet subscribed, hit that button now. We're building something here together, a community of people who understand this war at a level that mainstream coverage simply does not reach. New analysis drops regularly, and the deeper we go, the more the truth reveals itself. Subscribe, because as this conflict evolves and Russia's doctrine continues to fail, the pattern will become clear, and you'll want to be here to understand it in real time.